Hello, welcome to your Saturday night lineup primer here. I'm filling in for Devin this week. I am Jordan McNamara. I am the co-host of the Dynasty show with my co-host Chad Parsons, and I also do some of the weekly matchup articles with Devin as well. So I've been a staffer at Footballguys now for a couple years. So filling in for Devin this week. So go ahead, shoot your questions in on the in the comments. I already got a couple rolling in, and we'll spend some time together on this Saturday night. So hope everyone's Thanksgiving was good. In terms of big injuries, I think we're looking for this week. I was just checking out in preparation for the show, just checking out Dr. Jean's article over on the website. So if you're a subscriber, go ahead and check that out. Some, I think, key decisions that we'll be watching for this week. Aaron Jones, Marquise Brown, Elijah Mitchell, Cordell Patterson, and Alan Lazard are potential Sunday decisions. Likely inactives this week are Kadarius Toney and Corey Davis. Dr. Jean expects Saquon Barkley, Curtis Samuel, and Damian Harris, Ramondre Stevenson, Hunter Henry, Jonnu Smith, and Donovan Peoples-Jones to play. So number of guys ruled out as well: A.J. Brown, Antonio Brown, Sterling Shepard, Michael Carter, Rashad Penny. Saw today. They play Monday night, so I saw today there was a quote from Pete Carroll saying that they, in fact, might be placing him on IR. So unfortunate there. So we'll be on a watch for that again. Maybe make a roster move. I just know that might be coming. And in season long, it might be cuttable if you don't have any IR situations because he won't really be back in a usable time. Travis Homer ruled out as well. So that opens up that Alex Collins, DJ Dallas tandem there in Seattle. Jordan Howard as well out. Eric Ebron out. And I believe was placed on IR as well. So Pat Freiermuth wheels up. Ricky Seals-Jones ruled out. JaMychal Hasty and Kyle Rudolph as well. So we expect a potential return of Logan Thomas this week as well. So he again played on. They play on Monday night. So that is the concern there would be, how confident do you feel? Make sure you have a pivot there. Okay, so we got some questions coming in here. Tammy Rose writes in here, Jackson / Cooks or Brady / Lockett and FanDuel Cash. I think I'm going. I really like the Brady matchup this week, and so I'm going to go. And I like Seattle as well. So I'm going to go with the Brady Lockett side. It's Tampa. I think the highest as of right now. It appears to be the highest total of the week, and it is significantly. Yeah, it's the only game over 50 as of right now. So I like that game. I like the total on that game, and I like Brady in it as well. And then I think Seattle sets up pretty well here against Washington on Monday night as well. So that would be my take on that one. All right, next one up, FanDuel Cash. CMC and Devontae, and build the rest in the mid range. Tough to argue with those guys. I'm liking both. I actually in a dynasty league, I just kind of went all in for Devontae, so I'm all over that. The only concern I have with Devontae is with Aaron Rodgers, the fact that he's just not practicing at this point, it just gives me a little pause. I know the greatness and all that stuff. I wonder if that stuff comes back to beat you at times. Their offensive line banged up as well. This seems like a tough matchup for a team that is just decimated on the offensive line and playing a team that has a very stout and robust pass rush. So that would be my concern there. And I'd add on top of that, Rodgers is limited and not practicing. I'll add all that up. It gives me a little bit of pause on pressing everything in on Adams at this particular point. So that would be my caution there. Ultimately, that Carolina Miami game, one of the lower totals of the week as well. Carolina slightly favored on the road. So I like what you're thinking, Kevin. I just have a little bit of pause on the Adams angle of that. All right, Rick, what happened to Power Grid this week? I think it was on Thanksgiving, so I think that's what happened. But I'm not privy to that, so I'm not sure. Okay. What are your thoughts on Saquon for DK tournaments? This is from Dan B. That's a good question. I'm interested in what his ownership will be, and we have it over at the site. Got it at about 13%, so that marks him right about 10th or so. I do think with a level of uncertainty there, it's a good variance play. We don't necessarily know what the offense is going to look like. Under Freddie Kitchens, how much is it going to change? I find those places of uncertainty. I'm not sure if models are picking them up, for example. So I do think with that. That's interesting to me. They do play. They are playing the Eagles this week. They are a slight home underdog in a moderate line game total wise in the mid 40s there. So I think it's I think it's interesting. I think the 13% that we have him projected at, I think that's fair especially at the ranks that he's at. I guess I would feel pretty neutral about that at that particular projection. Do I like, let's see, game theory here. Do I like Brandon Cooks versus the Jets? I always like Brandon Cooks. So this is a Brandon Cooks, you're getting a Brandon Cooks fan here. So yes, I like Brandon Cooks. I think this offense will be back better with Tyrod, and so I think that's interesting as well. And the one thing that concerns me is like if we get into a spot where neither team's moving the ball because you get the Jets, that's the only thing that really that would be the only thing that concerns me. When you go over to the site, we have the strength of schedule for positions, and Houston is the fifth best matchup of the week for opposing wide receivers. So that is relative to the average that the opponent scores. How do teams score against you, basically? And so the Jets giving up 4.2 points more than average against opposing teams. So against their opponent's wide receivers. So that's a pretty good matchup there for Cooks. And I like it. Listen, our home favorite. Not many games you're going to get Houston as a home favorite. All right. Let's see here. Anthony sends in here. Okay. Anthony sends in here Javonte Williams, Elijah Mitchell, or Alex Collins for my flex. Collins gives me a little bit of pause. This is a good question. Collins gives me a little bit of pause because of some of the workload stuff, and it hasn't been a high ceiling situation. However, I think that's starting to clear up. You're getting a lack of, you don't have Carson. You don't have the uncertainty of Penny, it doesn't look like. And if he goes on IR, you're getting and with Homer out, you're getting in a DJ Dallas Collins situation. It's lean Collins ahead of DJ Dallas basically all throughout. DJ Dallas, I think, is picking up steam a little bit in, I would say, the past couple of weeks here. So, but this has really been an Alex Collins situation. The problem is it hasn't been particularly high upside. So do we see growth from that? This offense has been stagnant. That's my concerns there with them. I think it's a decent matchup for the offense in general against Washington. But that's my concern there a little bit. I mean, Elijah Mitchell, I think it's a good matchup. This is it's a good spot, and you kind of want to be in that in the spot there, starting Shanahan running backs. I like that. Generally, it is a relatively it's a neutral, just slightly below average matchup there for him this week. But it is a big total. In that game is approaching 50 in terms of the over under, and San Francisco a slight home favorite. So I like that as a formula as well. The problem that I have with like Javonte on paper, this is a good matchup. It's just such a timeshare. I mean, in virtually, we're doing the matchups and stuff. This is one of the ones that we wrote up, and I was looking at it. It's like just such a time split in terms of both routes and touches, in terms of all that stuff. It's really split down the middle between Gordon and Javonte. You're just in a really tough time, I think, benefiting from a good matchup just because you lack that clarified, centralized workload. So that would be my pause there. I think if I'm gonna play one, my thought would be play Elijah Mitchell. Thoughts on Miles Sanders? I think Miles Sanders for the rest of the season is really interesting to me, and we get to a spot where this offense is turned, and this was one of the most pass heavy offenses in the league coming at the start of the season, and Miles Sanders was basically an afterthought. He gets hurt, and all of a sudden it's pound the rock city. And so that's a definite change, and I think a good change. I think that's a benefit to Miles Sanders. And now Jordan Howard's out, and so this thing's really trending in a way that could be positive towards him. So I'm optimistic on him for the rest of the season. I'm actually made a trade. I got him included. They have the best strength of schedule for running backs the rest of the way. So through week 17, they get the Jets next week. There's a bye week 14. It's a good matchup against the Giants. The rest of their matchups are favorable in terms of it's Giants, Jets, bye, Washington, Giants, Washington. So all those are good matchups for running backs, above average production there versus other teams there. So that's really the position there. So I like him, and I like him for this week. If I didn't answer that specifically for this week, I did. You more of a cash or GP plea? Looking for thoughts on pay down for quarterbacks this week. Okay, so I mean, let me come back to that. I just have to get I don't have the salaries pulled up, so I'll pull them up and we'll take a look in a second here. John, you're not Devin, I know. Thoughts on going cheaper and wide receivers like Elijah Moore, Beckham, and paying up for Cooks and Harris? I mean, we talked about Cooks earlier. I mean, I think Beckham. I think Beckham is. I have multiple thoughts on Beckham this week, which is I have multiple thoughts on Beckham generally. I think the question that I have with him is he washed versus was it a bad situation in Cleveland? I think there's things you can point to in both scenarios. So that would be a question I would have generally. How does he integrate? Well, we're coming off of a bye. I trust Sean McVay, and I think some of the questions that I've heard posed around with people questioning the, questioning your, how this offense fits for the rest of the season. I think one of the things that I'm not as concerned with that as much, because I think that this is you're getting, it's more real life offense concerns than it is Odell Beckham Jr. concerns. I guess what I'm trying to say, like Robert Woods was using the running game and that sort of stuff, which you don't necessarily project for Odell Beckham Jr. And that's not something I care about for fantasy. So that's ultimately the, that's, I guess, the long story short of that is I'm not necessarily worried about Odell Beckham Jr.'s fit in the running game for fantasy. So I think McVay will find ways to get him involved, and I'm not necessarily super worried about the fit, because I trust McVay to sort of figure those things out. What is interesting to me in this whole scenario is I do think you get to a spot with this team generally where they've really invested in like situational guys. And at some point you have to say, when are you going to, instead of investing in situational guys, when are you going to invest in actual answers, right? Or so you're taking shots on guys like Tutu Atwell, right? You're taking shots on those guys. You're taking shots on Deshaun Jackson. Like, when are you going to solve some of your problems with traditional, next generation of this offense, Cup and Woods role type guys, as opposed to just situational deep threats, which they've done with Van Jefferson, which they've done with those guys. So that's sort of somewhat my concerns with Odell Beckham Jr. here going forward. I think, and how much do you trust Elijah Moore with Zach Wilson would be the other thing. So Moore's looked good. Wilson hasn't. Those are sort of the things. So I like Cooks this week. I think Beckham's interesting, and I trust probably Beckham more than Moore at this point. Okay, Barkley or Robinson in FanDuel. I think I like, assuming that's a tournament, I think I like Barkley more. Let's see. Thoughts on paying it for quarterbacks. I know Cracking FanDuel likes Jimmy G. Yeah, I'm trying to pull up the thing right now. Which I haven't had any success to do as of right now. Let me see here. Yeah, okay. So and that was, let me see here. Cracking FanDuel. Okay. I think that was your question. So let me grab here. Okay. And the question was thoughts on paying up for quarterback. I know. Yeah, Jimmy G's played well. So he has played well. We also like Burrow this week as well. So that's another spot you could potentially pivot. So that's another one you could pivot in. Jalen Hurts is in the Football Guys optimal lineup as well, and the optimal build as a quarterback. Brady as well there. So and then let me go back to that one. There was a question earlier. I'm just looking to see. Look, are you paying cash or more? Let's see here. Thoughts on paid down for cash this week? Okay. All right. So here we go. Yeah, I mean, Garoppolo is a spot where you can pay down, right? And in FanDuel for sure. We like that. That's one of the bigger ones we like this week. So that's a good spot to be in. So I would recommend that. Again, a couple other ones here. We like Cam against the Dolphins as our third favorite play in cash for DraftKings. So that's just checking out our Cracking DraftKings and Cracking FanDuel articles this week. Warren G, what's up? That was the question. Good. All right. Does James Robinson get back? I'm good, man. Thanks for checking in. All right. Does James Robinson get back on track versus the Falcons? Good question. I hope so. He's one that really is interesting long term. So I hope he gets back on track. I think he's going to be a fascinating offseason value for Dynasty, which is a lot of the way that I see some of this world too. It's the fifth best matchup of the week in terms of running backs versus opposing defenses here. Jets, Seattle, the Houston, Washington, Chicago, Dallas, and then Jacksonville. Obviously, Dallas already played. Chicago already played as well. So going forward on the week, third best matchup, just Houston, Washington, and then Jacksonville in terms of games going forward. Positive matchups against opposing defenses so far. So we it's a good spot, and hopefully a good spot to get back on track. Again, I sort of look at this going forward. Good matchup this week, neutral next week against the Rams, tougher matchup against Tennessee in week 14. We'll see sort of what they are. Houston, good matchup, slightly to the positive matchup in week 15, and then a huge matchup, the best running back matchup that there is against the Jets in week 16. So hopefully some stretch run action for James Robinson. Excited for it. Okay. John says, let's see, thoughts on tight end FanDuel cash. Is there any real reason to pay up considering the volatility? So I actually did a study a couple of years ago, just on tight end scoring generally. And so much of it, just looking at simple things like, where does a guy finish in a week? What are some of the indicators of finishing in a week? And it was an immense amount of it was just touchdowns, right? Like if you finished, I think it was something like if you finished with a touchdown, you were like 70% of the time a top 12 guy. It's just so much of that. And it was lesser so for like 3 catches, for example. Like you had a lesser chance of being way up there for what I would consider a volume accomplishment, like 3 or 4 catches, and then a touchdown. So some of that, there is some selection bias in there, of course, but I think it's interesting that volatility. Like when you just look at it, what's the thing? If I gave you one thing, what's the most likely one to be in the top 12? It was touchdowns. I think it ended up right around 4 or 5 catches was sort of the break-even spot in terms of odds. But yeah, so I do think, paying down, that's a strategy I typically employ, just because I think there is so much volatility to try and capture. I mean, Conklin's interesting. Dan Arnold blank last week, so maybe he's down in ownership. Freiermuth, again, without Ebron, is a good option there at the tight end position as well. Okay, let's see here. What strategy would you use when trying to win a 20-man custom contest? Let's see, and that's from Dan. Let me see it. Okay, Dan B. Yeah, I mean, I think you don't need a ton of a rarity, right? So this isn't, you're not talking about a GPP 150 entry. You're talking about a much narrower pool. So you are still shooting for upside, but you don't need to take massive swings. I'm not necessarily worried that much about ownership. It's more about getting it right than it is, I think, being rare. So that would be the thing that I would aim for in terms of that. The other thing too is I don't know what your contest is, right? So for example, if I had a group of people that I was playing with that let's just assume it's an analytics, it's a Footballguys Dynasty Show league, for example. It's a 20-man league, subscribers there. I sort of know what that group of people is probably thinking, right? The types of players that they're thinking, just generally how the positional biases that they might have, right? Where they might be more interested in allocating roster and cash and stuff like that, and salary, right? I might have an idea of that, and so veering off of that might make some sense, right? So if, for example, Darrell Williams in a week where Darrell Williams is a starter, like, might be a really interesting play in that format, I might veer away from that. Right. So that's an example of something that I would look to do. So I would just be cautious of understanding what the contest is, if there is some sort of situation in it that makes it biased towards certain types of players, and then think about veering away from them. That would be the other thing I would look. Okay. John, favorite game stack and run back. Yeah, listen, I think if I was going to game stack something this week, I mean, the Rams in Green Bay makes a lot of sense. However, I have some questions on it, as I mentioned earlier, with the Devontae Adams angle. So it's probably not one that I would be super willing to do. I think Tampa and the Colts is interesting. I think if you were looking lower costs, I think lower totals. I would think potentially, Atlanta makes a little bit of sense with Jacksonville. The only problem there is I'm not sure that Atlanta is going to be able to block up Jacksonville quite the way we need. If Cordero Patterson's back, maybe that makes something that you could do in there. And I'm not sure how you run that one back though. It's the only concern. In terms of other games that I think could go up, Chargers Denver I think is interesting in terms of one that might not garner a ton of attention, that you could potentially put together some, if you wanted to run Herbert, Allen, and then bring back receivers coming from the other side, something like that. I think that makes some sense as well. The other one I would think about doing is Minnesota. And I think that game has a chance to really shoot out. So Minnesota, San Francisco, that would be a game that I would be thinking about. So, I think so. I think maybe the three big ones: Tampa and in Indy, Minnesota and San Fran, and then probably I like the Chargers in Denver just because I think it might be. I think it might be a little bit rare. Okay, let's see here. Michael says, do you like Denver's running backs against the Chargers and DFS? I do. I mentioned this earlier. The only problem I have with them is we get to a spot where it's so spread out, right? It's basically almost completely a 50-50 timeshare. It's just tough to really capitalize on that with ceiling. So that would be my concern about it ultimately. I do like the matchup. Exploiting the matchup is a totally different question. All right, would you rather play Chenault or T.Y. PPR? I'm just so worried about, with T.Y. Hilton in recent weeks, he just hasn't played that much, which is giving me some pause. And so, I mean, that I think is a concern. Just pulling up the our snap count summary by team, which you can find over at footballguys.com. I'll just give you the actual data here. Tell you what I'm thinking. So let's see. This is last 4 weeks that Hilton has played. I think he's only played 4 weeks this season. 50%, 44%, 61%, 41% snap share. Just not a ton of love there in terms of feeling much of that. You look at, he's got a season high of 5 targets. He's got 16 on the season. I mean, that just is tough to feel comfortable with until you see something a little bit more. You look over the past, let's call it 4 weeks for Chenault, 4 targets, 8, 5. So we're seeing a little bit more there. That does correspond with DJ Shark being out as well. And then you just look at his snap share here. And 68, 79, 77, 63%. I think those, I would feel more comfortable playing Chenault based on all of that. Yeah, I mean, and the other thing that I would say is I do have some pause about, Lawrence, just because I think he's had a questionable start to his career. But I do, and a lot of the promise that we've been promised early on hasn't been realized, which gives me a little bit of pause. But I think, ultimately, I think the receiver position more than anything is a volume based position more than it is super worried about any of the efficiencies or the productivity of the quarterback. Give me a guy that's going to get 8 targets and I'll figure out the quality of the quarterback later. That's not something I'm so much worried about. So, given that, I think give me Chenault over Hilton. Okay. Wes says, okay, let's see here. Thoughts on trading away Hunt, Lockett, Ridley, and Eric Kendricks for Edmonds, Metcalf, and Blake Martinez as a contender in dynasty. All right, so I'd be interested to know how much of a contender you are. I will say this: I am not a big IDP guy, so if the difference between Eric Kendricks and Blake Martinez is huge, I'd be cautious on that. I mean, I'm leaning. My thought would be I'm leaning towards I'm leaning towards the Hunt side because I think Hunt and Edmonds are close when they're healthy, and Hunt's healthy and going to be active. I don't think the difference between Lockett and Metcalf's all that much, and I think Ridley's probably an equal or pretty close to the same level asset as Metcalf is when they're healthy. So I think, and there's nothing to say that Ridley won't come back this year. I think I'm not banking on that, but I don't think this trade. That's a gravy aspect of this trade. If Ridley comes back this year, I think that side can be a massive win. So I would take the Hunt, Lockett, Ridley side. And Eric, again, just with the caveat that Eric Kendricks versus Blake Martinez, IDP is not my place to sort of give you much advice just because I don't play the format. If I went down the IDP rabbit hole, I would never come back. So for the purposes of staying here, I have not taken the IDP plunge. Okay, Warren says sitting middle of the pack, give Brady and Dalvin, get Fields, Fant, and Boyd in a third. Okay, I'm assuming Warren, just you said FFPC best ball. Just it looks like Dynasty. Can you just? I'm just gonna assume it's Dynasty, and if it's not, let me give me a heads up there. So one of the things with so I'll analyze this as a Dynasty trade, and if it's not, then we'll just let me know. But that third indicates to me that it is a Dynasty trade. So I think that Brady can make, and the other thing I would say about this is I don't know if you can make this trade right now because Fields has already played. So just with that caveat aside this week, I think with Brady, you sort of have to understand with Brady that he is you have to understand the asset. Right? You have to understand what he's going to do for you, which is it's probably right now, and it's probably maybe next year, right? But that's a coin flip would sort of be the way I'd look at that. So you have to, if you're going to be on the Brady side of this, you have to be in a position where you think you can win. Dalvin Cook is right pairing those two assets together makes some sense. The problem with Dalvin Cook is he hasn't offered a ton of upside. So that would be I think you're sort of aligned right in that deal. The other thing I would think about an FFPC is roster spots are at a premium. So if you're on the other side of this, Fant, Boyd, how much does Boyd offer you in terms of value? Probably not a ton in terms of production over what you could otherwise roster, especially given the limited roster spots there. So that's, I think, definitely a consideration. So whenever you get a 3-for-2 or a 2-for-3 in FFPC, always remember that you have you have someone you're either cutting or getting rid of because the roster spots are at a crunch. So that would be, I think that's an important thing to think about in this. The third is interesting. So Warren does check in. It is Dynasty. I would wonder if Brady and Dalvin Cook, if they can get you a bye, right? I think that's interesting. And, what type of upgrade Brady is over your other quarterback that's starting is another consideration that I'd make. I think the only other thing that I would say about this deal is think about how you might look back at this deal in so it's late November now, in 3 months, and who's the most valuable player in it, and how do you feel about it if you didn't win a championship? So let's assume for a second Brady retires. How do you feel about this deal? You've given up Fields for Dalvin Cook, who's probably in a decline. I think we might be a little surprised about where Dalvin Cook ranks in the position when we fast forward to February, because it might be lower than we think. So that would be the only aspect that I would think of it. If it was me, if you're forcing me to take it, I'm probably taking the Fields side. And I don't love Fields, but I think it's probably, I think that's probably the way that I would lean. Again, then is there a different way to go about this, to get a Dalvin Cook or to get Brady individually? And then maybe you figure out a way, instead of, for example, can you pay a much lesser price for Fournette? can you pay, right? Can you do something like that where it's not costing you a potential future long-term starter for two declining assets? That would sort of be my pivot and my thought. All right. If you have any more questions, go ahead, put them in the comments to the show, and I can answer them here. A couple other things I'd point you to. Dr. Cheen's article is something I always turn to. So this is understanding the expectations, game day injury expectations for week 12. It'll be updating tomorrow, as well as we get overnight news and anything like that. Situations, again, I highlighted them at the top, but Cordero Patterson, we're hoping to get some information here on him overnight. And good news for Swift, by the way, and Darren Waller after suffering injuries on Thanksgiving. I was nervous about both of those guys as I was devouring some leftovers, and but good to see good news on both of them. Again, your Sunday decisions: Aaron Jones, Marquise Brown, Elijah Mitchell, Cordero Patterson, and Allen Lazard. Those are your big decisions there. All right, another question here. From Game Theory, do you like Kyle Pitts tomorrow? I like Kyle Pitts every day, but that's not what you're asking. You're asking in a more specific way of, do I think he's a play? Yes. Let me just see what this. Let me check here. So, cracking DraftKings, for example, this week we have as our second favorite play. And I'll just the continued absence of Calvin Ridley increases Kyle Pitts' chances of having a blow-up game in this favorable matchup against the Jags defense that ranks 29th in overall DVOA and 31st in pass DVOA. Few tight ends offer as much upside as Pitts in general, and this looks like a matchup for Pitts to take advantage. So I concur. All right. Well, seeing no more questions, I want to thank everyone for joining me on this Saturday night. Thanks for Devin for letting me fill in the chair, and hopefully we'll be back in a future. I can pinch hit in a future situation when needed. Good luck to you all in your games this weekend. For anyone playing season long or dynasty or anything like that, just keep churning the waiver wire. I was working on a project earlier this week, and I was just gauging some of the running back situations that have helped people in years past. And there's guys that at this point are still on the waiver wire that have cashed people checks, and whether it's dynasty leagues, whether it's redraft leagues, all of those things down the stretch. Keep churning those backup running backs. Make sure you're optimizing your roster. One thing to think about, whether it's in redraft or if it's in dynasty, how does this player make a difference for me down the stretch? Right? How does this player improve the odds of me winning a championship? In redraft, that's a much easier analysis. In dynasty, I think at the bottom end of your roster, it should lean heavily that way. Right? Again, it might just be a spot one-off start, something like that. Optimize those spots, right? Because just think about that question, as you're sitting there, if it's a backup quarterback or if it's someone that's coming up on a bye, for example. We talked about Penny earlier on. He's a good example of this. If he's going to go on IR, right, for him to be back, it's going to be almost impossible for you to trust him to start the week that he's back. So he's basically useless to you. So you can almost cut him, right? That type of situation is the one that I would be, avoiding again. And then you look at situations like Ty Johnson, constantly churning the back end of your roster can sort of unearth these situations where, hey, if something happens to Tevin Coleman, all of a sudden we've got this massive find on our hands who might be flex viable as is right now. So again, keep churning those situations. It's week 12. We've got more than a month to go, and a lot of things can change. So definitely be focused on that. Again, take some of your time tonight. Just scour your waiver wires. Pick up running backs, optimize the back 2-3 spots on your roster. That'd be my daily challenge for you until tomorrow. All right. Well, thanks again for joining me. I really appreciate it. Happy Thanksgiving, and we'll talk again very soon.